Welcome back to the channel. Today we have a new build. It's a 2017 GMC Terrain SLE. Now this one is all-wheel drive with the big V6. Kind of rare options for an SLE, but not as rare as some of the other ones it has. So it got hit by another car right here in the wheel, in the back door. No airbags deployed. You're looking at all the damage. Not sure why they totaled it. Shouldn't be too bad. It's actually much better than I was expecting, which is very rare. Usually they're a lot worse than I expect. Now this thing is also pearl white, which is kind of another rare option for an SLE. An SLE is the lowest trim level for pretty much GMC. SLE, SLT, Denali. It's pretty much how it goes. There are some other submodels in there and for different vehicles, but for these, those are your basic three. So why do you pay for more paint when you bought the lowest trim level? I don't know. But they bought a lot of weird stuff on this one. Of course, I got in it at the auction. It was completely dead, so I went to hook up the battery cables to charge it on the way back from North Carolina, and found out that they disconnected the battery for me. So hopefully it kept the battery from going dead. I plugged it in. Let's find out. $41,331 miles. Pretty low miles. In addition to the fancy paint, they also got a sunroof, lane departure, collision avoidance, blind spot monitors, heated seats. Yep, heated cloth seats. Navigation. I don't know why they were spending money on weird stuff. Maybe they just didn't like leather. Can't say that I blame them. It looks like it'll drive, so let's get it down to the shop and see if we can back it off the trailer and start working on it. So with all the suspension on the right rear being all cattywampus and stuff, it's pushing the car to the left side of the trailer. And we're going to miss our ramps. Could you imagine the screaming involved if I had fallen off the ramps? So we're going to move our ramps over and continue backing off the trailer. Hopefully they're wide enough. Looks like we have our rear suspension. Here's the wheel bearing. We'll just try and see if the old one's any good. And we got a door. A little dent in it. No problem. Price is right. It's not the right color, but we'll use this one. Up on the lift. It's not nearly as bad as I thought, looking at it when I was sitting on the trailer. I was actually planning on this little bracket here being ripped out of the floor and probably a subframe, but it doesn't look like it. So let's pull this off, find out exactly what's bent. Hopefully the parts we picked up from Scott's Terrain Emporium will be enough that we can get this wheel straightened out. Something's broken there. Broke the bottom of the knuckle here, bent our bolt, twisted up this arm, and that came back and hit our shock, bent our shock up a little bit. So I think we're just going to change everything. I was kind of worried about this upper control arm here, where they mount on the subframe. Those ears are pretty weak, but looks like it didn't bend it at all. I'm going to change it anyway just because I have it. But looks like our subframe's gonna survive. Not that they're expensive, but hey, if I don't have to waste the labor to change it. Let's get our suspension on here and see if we can straighten out our wheel. First thing we're gonna do is unbolt the brake hose from the upper control arm. Set that off to the side. We'll unplug our ABS wire. Then we can unbolt the upper control arm from our knuckle. It is a nut and bolt, so we gotta hold the back side, the nut with the wrench, and back it out with the impact. And until we run out of room. And we're gonna have to rethink our strategy here. So we'll run it back in a little bit, get our impact out of the way, and we'll do it by hand. Opa! A little tension there. We'll pull our brake hose around. Now we can unbolt the e-brake cable bracket from the trailing arm. It's a nut and a bolt as well. Pop the bracket off of there. We can disconnect our brake caliper. We're going to take the bracket and everything off. So we'll just get our ratcheting hammer in there and break the bolts loose. Probably should have left one of them in there so that I'm not trying to hold the caliper. My first brake job. Give me a brake. Push the caliper in a little bit, then we'll hang it up out of the way, keep the tension off the brake hose. Pull the drive axle nut off. We'll push the drive axle through the hub with our fingers to prove this is not a Rust Belt car, since we don't need heat and a hammer and prayers. We can unbolt the front of our trailing arm and the bracket that's usually ripped out of the bottom of this thing. Bolts don't want to come out, but we'll get them. A little tension on that as well. Push our drive axle the rest of the way out and tip the hub down. We tip the hub down so we can get to the bolts on the back of it, so we can unbolt it from the knuckle. We're going to take the brakes, backing plate, hub, rotor, and everything, and just set it off to the side. That way I don't have to take everything apart. Save me a little time. It's just the 4 bolts that bolt the hub in that holds everything on. They're not as friendly as I'd like them to be to come out, but they do come out. We're going to do a brake job later, so we'll change that rotor then, and we'll change this hub if it happens to make noise or ends up being bent. For right now, I just want to get all this done so that I can drive it around and not have that wheel dangling back there. So we'll pull the last bolt all the way out. Then we're just going to let the whole hub and backing plate and everything just kind of hang on the e-brake cable. I'm sure some experts are going to tell me that that's bad for the cable, but I'm not swinging on it like Tarzan, so I think it'll be fine. We're going to unbolt our knuckle from the lower control arm. We're going to use the original lower control arm. It should be fine. If we do need to change it later on, we do have one, but it looks like everything was above the control arm and just kind of pivoted on that bolt. Didn't hurt the control arm. In the pile. We're going to pull the ABS wire off of our upper control arm. It's just got little plastic Christmas trees on the back. We're just going to pull it out and hope we don't break any so we can reuse them. Now we're going to take the other control arm off the bottom here. I guess it'd be the middle control arm because it's not a lower, even though they call it a lower. We'll get that out of our way. It makes it a little easier to get to that upper control arm. It's kind of tucked way up in there. So this is just a nut and a bolt, kind of like all the other ones. In the pile. Now when you get to the nut and bolt for the upper control arm, break it loose. There is a cam nut on the back of it, so it does adjust it in and out. We don't have to put a wrench on that side. Caffeinated Scott's going to take this out a little faster. Spin the nut off of there. The bolt doesn't come all the way out. Actually, it does, but there's a filler neck in the way. We're just going to slide the bolt out enough, pull our control arm out. You know what we do with that. In the pile. Now we have our rear suspension from Scott's Terrain Emporium. We're just going to take it apart enough that the pieces are easier to get in. We'll leave as much together as we can. So we'll put it back together in reverse. We'll start with the hardest part to get to, which is the upper control arm. We'll squeeze the bolt back in there. Put the nut back on it. And we'll raise it up to where it'll be when it's loaded, and we'll tighten it up. They're going to end up moving all this stuff around again for the wheel alignment, but we'll at least get it about where it belongs. Now we can put our trailing arm, knuckle, and front lower control arm in there. Left it all together. The drive axle and the knuckle. And we'll put the bolt through our upper control arm just to hold this all out of the way. And we'll bring our hub up here and slide that over the axle. Put our bolts in the hub. We'll try not to cross thread them because the next guy that has to take this out, we don't want to give him a hard time since there's a good chance it might be us. So once we got our hub bolted in, line up our control arms on the bottom, put the bolts in there. Then we can put our bolts for our trailing arm up in the front. Get them all started. Once we have them all started, we can tighten them all down. My impact identifies as a torque wrench. Check and make sure we didn't forget any. Now we can put our bolt in our lower control arm. It's the last one we have left, so it's going to be a little bit of a pain. Use a screwdriver to move the bushing around so that we can line up our bolt. Once we get it started, we'll just run it in there. The thread will pull it in. We'll put the nut on the back and tighten it up to OEM spec Ugga-Duggas. Now we're going to change the shock because it's got a few dents in it and I don't like bodywork, so we're just going to replace it. We'll bolt the bottom and pull the bolt out of the top. There's no nuts and bolts on this one. The nuts are actually welded on for a change. So we'll press the shock a little bit, pull the bolt out of there, and we'll kind of jiggle the shock around and twist it until it finally gives up. In the pile. Now we have our used, slightly less dented, and hopefully just as worn as the other side shock to put in. So we'll put the bolt up in the top, compress it a little bit, slide it into its slot on the bottom, and run the bolt in there. Then the bolt on the top, we're done. We'll raise the lift up and pull our stand out that was holding our suspension in place while we had the shock out. We'll pull off the old bracket for our e-brake cable and toss it in the you-know-where. We can line up our new bracket, put our nut and our bolt through it, and tighten it up. Click. Put our drive axle nut on, tighten that down to manufacturer specs, 105 Ugga-Duggas. Then we can tighten up our upper control arm. And we'll tighten up the lower control arm. Have to do that with a wrench, like a caveman. There's no room in here for sophisticated power tools. We'll pry off what's left of our ABS harness from the upper control arm, so we have a place to put our new one. Bluetooth. Now we'll push the little Christmas trees back into our upper control arm and plug in the ABS wire. We can throw our caliper bracket, pads, and caliper back on. That's just been hanging out over there. Start the bolts. We'll put the bolt in for the hose. Nut and bolt. Get that started. Then we can tighten everything up. I probably could have got a socket and some power tools in there, but I'm too lazy to walk back to the toolbox and find something to work. So our ratcheting wrench will get the job done. So one way to avoid having leftover bolts and parts that aren't tightened up is to go back over the job once again before you put the tire back on. That's what I'm doing. Just basically looking over every nut and bolt, make sure I tightened it, and I did, so we're ready to throw the tire back up. Throwing the tire up was the easy part. Now we got to put the center cap on. It's got a little notch so that it only lines up one way. And, well, can't seem to find the combination. Been outsmarted by a center cap. Now we'll keep trying until we get it. What's the secret? Because if I just throw it in the car, I'll lose it. Got it. So our wheel is straight-ish. This is not nearly as bad as I planned. Planned on this bracket being totally torn out of here. Didn't need to do that. Planned on the subframe. Doesn't look like I'm going to need to do that. I'll know for sure when I send it for an alignment, but there's a bunch of adjustment on there, and it looks pretty straight compared to the other one. I plan on quite a bit of damage here. But that's it. All your strength for this rocker is actually back here. Kind of missed it. So it might just be an outer panel and then straighten this wheelhouse. If worst case, I could always piece in the wheelhouse up here if I have to. There's supposed to be a wheel liner in here. We didn't get that. But yeah, I was planning on a lot more. Somebody's been here before. This door has been painted before. So is that one. They taped off the trim and painted it too. So we're gonna fix that. Of course, there's nothing on the Carfax, so I guess there's no way it could have possibly been wrecked before, because there's only one accident, and that's this one. Unless Carfaxes are not as good as everyone says they are. Nah. A little damage up here to fix, courtesy of the auction. So we'll repair the bottom of the fender here. This might buff out. We'll find out. Might have to paint the bumper. Colors don't match. Maybe they'll match when we're done. That's a GM. Gonna need some tires. That's all normal stuff. That's it. All the fancy options. No power lift gate. That's garbage. And this one's missing some tabs. No money. Oh, we got masks. We don't need those anymore. We're not playing pandemic anymore. Uh-oh. Arts and crafts. Glitter, anyone? I'm going to do evil things with this. If you're going to leave me stuff, do something good. That was useful. In the pile. That's the cable for when you put the full-size tire in the car after you've changed the spare. It actually lives down in the spare tire well. I don't know why it was out. So I just threw it back in there. My detail guy's gonna charge me extra for the glitter. So all of our gaps look really good. The top of the door isn't even out. So it looks like it just kind of bumped the suspension. It couldn't have been too hard. Didn't set off the airbags. So I'm going to try just changing the door. I'm not even going to change the hinges because the gaps are okay. Should be all right. So we'll find out. If I do, I put the door up there and everything's lined up and ready to go. I'll just pull it back off and paint it and throw it back on again. Let's get this door off and get our new one on. So we'll unbolt our door check from the pillar. GM and their copious amounts of Loctite. We can unbolt the door check from the inside of the door and drop it down inside the door. Now we're going to do a little body work on our door. We have our door adjustment tool. We're going to straighten it out so that it'll close on a car that the dog leg isn't all smashed in on. That way we can put it back on our parts car to store it. Ship it. It's easier to store the door together because there are still some good parts on it, like the window and the moldings and door panel and wiring, and I can use that later. So we'll keep it there, and I'll just take it off as I need those parts, or eventually just throw it all away if I don't need it. So we'll disconnect our wiring harness. We pulled the boot off so we can expose the little plastic retainer. And push the little 4 tabs in there and pop that out of there. We can unplug it. Stuff the plug back in there so we don't smash it. Now we can start unbolting our door. The reason I want to unbolt the door from the hinges is that I won't disturb the paint if I leave the hinges on the vehicle. And the hinges are self-aligning when you bolt them to the door. So if I can do all this and everything lines up, I can just unbolt the door, paint it, put it back on, everything's all realigned. If I take them off the car itself, I have to readjust everything after we paint it. So it just saves me a little time. So it's worth the gamble. Start our bolts. Snug them up so that it has a chance to align itself, and then we'll tighten them all up. And we'll check our door and make sure it opens and closes like it should. Close our front door and see how our gaps are. They don't look too bad. Somebody's been here before. This also belongs right about there. And they're glued on here. Looks like rubber cement. So we got a drivable, we got our door on, everything fits. And we didn't even spend 2 hours on it yet. And that even included the time to go over to Scott's Terrain Emporium and pick up our parts because they don't deliver. But next time we come back, we're gonna straighten out that dog leg and get our door apart for our painting gnomes. And this job is pretty much almost done. We'll have some other work to do that's not from the accident. We'll take care of that. That's probably actually gonna be more time than the actual accident work. Actually, cleaning the glitter out of there is probably going to take more time than anything. Feel sorry for the detailing gnome. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. So we're going to pull all these clips off the bottom of the door. So our bodywork gnomes, sand it all down and paint it. We have that little piece of the molding left over, so we'll clip that on there to give us a little handle to pop those off. We'll pop our belt molding off. Just pushes up, slides off the tab in the back. Now we'll pull off our letters that aren't even close to straight. And we're not going to reuse the letters because we're never going to get all that rubber cement off the back. Now we're going to end up painting this door because I don't know what the last guy did and that glue kind of tears up the paint. So we're just going to prime the whole door just to cover our bases, make sure we don't have any problems, and then we're going to repaint the whole door. We're going to blend into this fender, and there's a little dent in the fender, so we don't have to get the PDR guy out there. We'll just straighten the fender because we're going to paint it anyway. So we're going to pull our fender liner out, so it's ready for the painting gnome to paint it, and our bodywork guy can get in the back of there and hammer and dolly that dent out of there. A couple of bolts you got to pull out that holds it to the bumper. Couple more on the bottom, and our fender liner's out. And here we have a famous GM design flaw that rots out the bottoms of the fenders. All the leaves collect down in here. We got this insulation that absorbs water and dirt, just kind of soaks it in and sits up on top of the fender. And once it rubs through the paint, it starts rusting. You end up with holes in the bottom of the fender. You see all the dirt that's on there. Luckily the paint hasn't rubbed through, so it hasn't started rusting yet. So after we knock out our little compost garden there, we can get to the clips for this molding in the back. Just squeeze the tabs together and pop the front clip off. And we'll just push the molding off the rear clip. And the bottom clip, there's really no good way to save it. So I just break them, and Scott's Terrain Emporium has extras. We'll just put a new one in. We'll pop that rear clip out of the fender, and we'll throw it back on the molding so we don't lose it, and it's ready to go back in when we're putting it back together. Now on to the other side. We shouldn't have to be even working on this side, but things happen at the auction. Cars get moved hundreds of times and accidents happen. So we're gonna just fix it because we kind of figure things are gonna happen. So we're planning for it. We'll pull our little compost bin out of this side, and we can get to our clips for that molding then. So once upon a time, before I had actual gnomes, I was the bodywork gnome. So I can do bodywork and paint work. I just choose not to because I don't like it. So the bodywork gnome is busy. I'm going to start his job for him. We're going to pop this dent out by hand, get it as close as we can, which is about as close as I'm going to get to PDR because I do not have the skills or patience for what those guys do. They're pretty amazing. I am not. So that side didn't matter because the paint was already broken through. We have to paint it anyway. This side, we could probably get it out with PDR, but since we're blending into the fender anyway to paint the door, it doesn't really matter if we have to disturb the paint. So I'm just going to hammer and dolly it. The bodywork gnome is busy doing something else I don't want to do, so I can manage this part, give him a head start. So all he has to do is throw a thin coat of Bondo over it after I'm done straightening out the metal, and it'll be good to go. Prime it, and we'll hand it over to the painting gnome. But you guys always want to see me include bodywork, and I usually don't record the gnomes, but since I'm the gnome, well, I get recorded. Go back over and hammer out the rest of our dent that didn't come out of the driver's side. And once we got it all straightened out, we'll hand it over to the gnome. And this really is the end of the video. There's no more. When we come back next time, we'll keep going on that dog leg and get a little more of the front end done. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.